Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Happy to be with you for the second week of June. It's our first episode of this week. We'll get another one to you later on. And if you missed our episodes last week, well, it set the stage for June because this is an extremely busy month of live on-campus coverage, which is our favorite kind of coverage because we live here. We have families here, and there's a reason for it. It's so we can quickly get to Nittany Lions events, and they are scattered throughout this month. Last Thursday, we got over to the Lash Building, Penn State's official football headquarters. We spoke to just about every coach on the staff. We spoke to Penn State's general manager as well. A ton of content trickling out at Lions 24/7 from that. Hopefully, you've already caught a bunch of that. And then on Friday, we were out for the first 7-on-7 tournament and Big Man Challenge event. There'll be a couple more of these over the course of June, but it brought a lot of talent to campus in terms of the linemen, a lot for us to look at. And over the course of the weekend, because we had another camp on Sunday in Holuba Hall, Penn State's indoor practice facilities, it was a pretty rainy Sunday here, but we saw more than 10 total members of Penn State's 2026 recruiting class. So more than half of that class, which currently ranks 5th nationally. So we got some fresh evaluations for that group for your future Nittany Lions to get to on this episode. And then lastly, we'll finish out with a lot of feedback coming off of Penn State's very, very important official visit weekend that it just experienced. A ton of undecided prospects in town. The weekend before, the theme of that visit weekend was the commits were on campus. It was a nice reunion for them. This was a little bit differently. Now the attention was placed on filling those remaining pieces in this 2026 class. And we'll talk about how the Nittany Lions did and who they may be pushing toward the finish line to jump on board with that class in a little while. To talk about all this, let's welcome in our resident recruiting insider, Tyler Calvaruso. Tyler, good to get you back on board. And every June, we have so much to discuss, and this one is no exception.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I mean, we're really in the thick of it now, right? We are now officially midway through the June official visit slate, and it feels like it's been going on forever, but the reality of it is we've only had 2 OV weekends this month. You're coming off a massive one. There's a ton to get into coming off that, and there are 2 more important ones coming up as well. And it feels like that May 16th, 18th official visit weekend that took place, that included guys like Joey O'Brien, Corey Adams, Dorian Barney, all these top targets. It feels like ages ago at this point. That's how official visit season will do you, man.
It does, and that's the same weekend. I believe that we were over at the Elite 11 camp here in State College that kind of got us kicked off for the month of May, and now here we are into June, and there's so much to work our way through, and we'll do that right now. And let's go back to Friday, the Big Man Challenge Camp, which brings linemen from across the region to campus. A lot of them travel with their teams. Some of them travel individually, but they're all working under the direction of offensive line coach Phil Troutwine, Andy Kotelnicki, and James Franklin were also over there keeping close tabs on the group. And ultimately, we saw those linemen separated, which is what always happens during these events. We see a primary group that the staff is especially fixated on. And the headliner of that group this past Friday was a Nittany Lions commit, Kevin Brown, a young man that you and I, Tyler, have been tooting his horn for a while here on this podcast since we got a chance to see him before his sophomore year 2 years ago on the camp scene here at Penn State. At that stage, it was a very low offer sheet, but Penn State was on it. Penn State was the first FBS program to offer him during his freshman year at Harrisburg High School. Well, back then he was about 225 pounds. Now he's 50 pounds heavier. He's more athletic than he's ever been, and he was dominating drill action and getting every piece of his workout under the direction of Phil Troutwine. I know he's solidly inside of our top 100 right now, Tyler, but he's coming off of a junior season in which he missed nearly all of game action. He got back for a playoff run with Harrisburg, but he had to even then play with like a metal plate in his foot. He is fully healthy now, and he is somebody that I think could really skyrocket in these rankings as he continues to make his case as one of the more unique offensive line recruits I've ever come across.
Yeah, if he had a full slate of junior season film, I think we could very easily be having the conversation of him as a top 50 prospect right now. I think me and you can make the argument that he should be in that range already, but it is what it is when it comes to where he stands in the rankings. The fact of the matter is Kevin Brown is an elite level prospect there. No matter how you slice it, he's elite, he's blue chip, whatever tag you want to slap on him, it applies to Kevin Brown. I mean, I can't say in my time doing this, I've seen an offensive line recruit built quite like him. I mean, does he need to continue getting stronger and adding, mass? Because he is still pretty lean. Yeah, 100%. But I mean, we're also talking about a high schooler here. Kevin Brown is so physically advanced for his age compared to some of the other linemen we've seen in this class. It's just he kind of blows him out of the water in that regard. And I mean, the movements, he's just so fluid in everything he does. I think his background, having his father who played at West Virginia, spent some time in the NFL, I think that helps because he has it in him, and his father's very active and involved in the developmental process. And those two have a great relationship between that side and the Penn State staff. So everything's always on the up and up in terms of where Kevin Brown needs to be, taking the necessary strides. But you don't need to tell Kevin Brown what to do either, because he's one of those guys who has an endless work ethic and an endless motor. So everything we see out of him from early in his high school days at Harrisburg to now, I mean, I don't think any of it really surprises me. I think when me and you first got eyes on him, if we had to predict the trajectory for his development and where he would be, this would be it. And we see it every single time he camps. The more reps we see him take, the more he looks like a potential future elite offensive lineman at the next level.
Yeah, Phil Troutline didn't blink. He was the one who spearheaded that offer back in the fall of 2022 or 2023, whatever we're looking at.
Honestly,
his freshman year, he's 220 pounds. He's his first year of high school. Phil Troutline sees what he needs to see, puts an offer on the table, and they're all in with Kevin Brown. And as you mentioned, his father, they've established a really strong tie there. His dad was an offensive tackle for West Virginia, so he is getting training on the side. I loved kind of getting to learn about this young man too a couple of years ago, because his family essentially kept him out of football until later in middle school, let him go do a lot of other things athletically, kind of get a well-rounded experience as a childhood, because they said they knew this is where it ended up with for him athletically. It ended up with him being probably a high-level football prospect. And not only is he a blue-chip lineman, and I want to emphasize lineman, defense, offense, he is a blue-chip lineman. We saw him get a rep or two on the defensive line on Friday against fellow Penn State commit Roseby Lubintis. Wasn't pretty for Lubintis in that particular moment. But Kevin Brown, 11 sacks, 22 tackles for loss last year, or as a sophomore, I should say, his last full season. I think he's going to wreak havoc defensively. But he could be a great one at offensive tackle. He's a blue chip talent as a lineman, but he could be great as an offensive tackle. He could be great in Happy Valley. He could be great in the NFL. This could be a kind of career trajectory that we got to see it, kind of its origins here a little bit, at least in terms of his college recruitment and his upbringing in Harrisburg High School. We could be talking about this one 20, 30 years down the road, Tyler, about how we got to see Kevin Brown back when. And I feel confident and comfortable in speaking like this in a public forum on our podcast, because I know firsthand that Penn State staff feels the same way.
Yeah, they're sky high on him. And I'm glad you brought up the whole lineman thing, like not specifying him and pigeonholing him into one spot. Because if Kevin Brown decided, if he just woke up one morning to say, hey, I want to be a defensive lineman at the next level, I still think he'd be a top 100, top 150 level kid. I mean, just look at the reps. Yeah, like the athleticism. If you go on social media, there was a video, I forget who posted it. It blew up, and there were people in the comments saying, oh, he's built like the Bosa brothers. I mean, I can't really argue that in terms of him being a potential defensive lineman. He has that build, but man, when it comes to his potential on the O-line, it's as high as it could possibly get. I feel comfortable speaking in that manner as well. I think that really the sky's the limit. I think the best is ahead for Kevin Brown. I think the sky truly is the limit. And we talk about high ceiling prospects often. There are a lot of high ceiling prospects that we come across really on a cycle basis. You know, there are guys we always say, oh, well, if he hits in his development, the sky, he can really, really reach an elite level. I think Kevin Brown takes that a step even further. And I think where he is right now, he's even further along in his development than a lot of the other high ceiling guys that we come across.
You mentioned high ceiling. I'll throw this at you. I think he has one of the highest floors I've ever seen.
That's fair too.
Lineman.
Yeah.
Because barring injury, and that's a part of football, it's a part of life. Our bodies aren't made to last. They're not built to perform at a high level forever. But barring injury, Kevin Brown, I just don't see him not being a productive football player at this level. I don't see him not making an impact. And I mean, I spoke with Messiah Mickens, and who we're going to talk to in a bit. He's a running back at Harrisburg. He's also a top 24/7 recruit. He's been recruited throughout his high school career, just like Kevin Brown. So I think they have a lot of similarities from a mindset standpoint. And he said that this is an immediate impact player who he doesn't quite know how to describe. He said he basically raises the bar for Harrisburg High School. He raises the bar for fellow top recruits on that team. And this is exactly who you want to kind of show up at your doorstep as an 18-year-old freshman, and then let him into your building and let him impact your culture over the course of the next few years. And so we'll talk a lot about Kevin Brown in the future, but we needed to start off this show because I thought he was the headliner of what we witnessed on Penn State's practice fields this past weekend. And you can see for yourself, we have full video highlights over at Lions247.com, along with some more evaluation of what we heard and witnessed from Kevin Brown's performance here. We have a bunch of camp highlights over at Lions247.com and commentary for VIP subscribers. And today is June 10th. And if you've been listening to this podcast, I've mentioned this is the last day of our early June sale, 60% off a VIP subscription. Last day to do it. So if you're tuning into this on Tuesday, as we drop this, go over to Lions247.com, sign yourself up, and enjoy great savings for a full year of VIP analysis. And oh, by the way, that Harrisburg squad is expected to roll in this weekend for 7-on-7 action. So there's a good chance we see more of Kevin Brown and certainly Messiah Minkins in the next few days. And let's get over to Minkins because these two are going to be a feared tandem in the state of Pennsylvania during their senior seasons at Harrisburg. Not only on the offensive end, where you're going to have Kevin Brown paving pathways for Minkins as a running back, but on the defensive side of the ball, where Minkins was a Max Preps All-American linebacker last year, and Kevin Brown is a very productive, impactful defensive lineman. When it comes to Minkins, Tyler, this is a guy that I think Penn State fans, some of them at least, have kind of been holding their breath on whether he would be a part of this class because Ja'Juan Seider departs the staff back in February. Seider was part of the staff. In fact, he was probably the face of the staff for Messiah Minkins during recent years. And remember, Minkins' recruitment with Penn State goes back, before his high school year? So this is a long-standing relationship that he had to kind of step back away from, realize that Ja'Juan Seider is now wearing that Fighting Irish logo on his polo shirt. They have had communication since then. There has been talks about him getting Notre Dame. But what I heard from Messiah Minkins coming out of this camp is that he can't imagine himself at any other school. He told me he just locked in plans for early enrollment. He hopes to get to campus this winter, have a few weeks of playoff practices with his future teammates, and then really hit the ground running next spring to get himself involved in that running back position battle, which is going to be without Nick Singleton and Katron Allen for the first time since 2021. And I think what Minkins also told me about this class, he's not just talking about himself and what he can do at Penn State. He told me directly that he thinks this class could be like the Nick Singleton, Drew Aller class. That's the way he described it. We know it as the 2022 group. It was a group that was important right off the get-go. I think 10 guys burned red shirts as they went to the Rose Bowl and won that. And we have seen what has happened since then. They've gone to a Big Ten championship game. They've gone to the playoffs. And now that group is at the front of what people believe could be the number one team in America this year. And so, Tyler, I just want to clear up any concerns, at least as we hear it directly from Minkins' mouth, about this guy maybe being a flight risk. We got a few more months to work through. I don't think Ja'Juan Seider is going to lose his cell phone number, but Minkins on the field on Sunday, first opportunity to work directly with Stan Drayton. They had spent some time working on the board in his meeting room earlier this spring. They've talked a bunch, but he said he really appreciated the hands-on approach. He said it was a different, not your average running back drills. He said he came across some new drills during this process. He was the one at the very front of a line of probably 20 or so running backs throughout Sunday. He did some good work as a receiver and some one-on-one passing drills, and he certainly held up his end of the bargain in some one-on-one work against linebackers. Minkins is a big, filled-out running back. I talked about his ability to get after it as an All-American linebacker. He has the vision, and he has this natural ability. And I will just say, his footwork, you would not anticipate how sharp and rapid it is based on his body build, but it's there right now. And so I think you look at the body of work that Minkins has done as a productive high school football player for multiple programs, now for a perennial powerhouse at Harrisburg, and you match that up to the offer sheet that he has collected as a young talent all the way through to this point. And Penn State is in a really good spot, certainly in the driver's seat. I don't think there's anybody really in the passenger seat right now. There may be Ja'Juan Seider yelling from the back seat, but for Penn State to get this one done and kind of a 4-year recruitment process with a player of this caliber who sounds very bought in on the program, he just seems like, again, a guy who steps in like Kevin Brown, and you really feel good about handing him the keys to the future of your program because of his mindset, because of his accountability, and certainly because of his athletic profile.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you recall this, Tyler, but me and you, we watched Messiah Mickens' camp as a sophomore. This was before he was committed to Penn State. And I remember our conversation afterward, it was actually centered around his footwork and just wow, because it didn't look like a high school sophomore, and especially not a high school sophomore with that body type. Nothing really added up in that regard because Messiah Mickens is at a completely different level, and he has only gotten better in that kind of developmental area as his high school career has gone on, as he has made the move from Trinity over to Harrisburg. And look, I think recruitment wise, he's gotten maybe a little bit of a bad rap among the fan base. I mean, the kid's position coach left. He had known him for 2.5, 3 years. I mean, there were reasons that Messiah Mickens committed to Penn State far beyond Jaywan Sider, but fact of the matter is that was indeed his closest relationship. And then I remember when Sider popped up for an in-home visit, during the spring contact period, again, Mickens isn't going to turn him away given that relationship. That's just not how it works. Messiah's always been, you've always had the sense in this recruitment that Penn State was going to be the place where he ultimately landed. Whether he actually went through and visited Notre Dame, which we do not expect to happen at this point, whether he went on and visited schools like Georgia, Missouri, South Carolina, some of the others who were involved with him, you always got the sense Penn State was going to be the eventual landing spot. And I think now that he's taken his official visit, he spent more time with Stan Drayton during that trip, obviously. And now that he's worked with Drayton in a camp setting, he's gotten that hands-on coaching, the kind of hands-on coaching he's going to get as a member of Penn State's running backs room. I think it has just solidified things for him even further because it's answered a lot of the questions and probably eased any of the potential doubts that he had lingering, because all of his previous camp experiences, who did they come with? Jaywan Sider. And he got acclimated with Sider's coaching style. He knew what it would be like working with Sider. He didn't know what it was going to be like working with Drayton because, again, he just did not have the opportunity to do so until this weekend. And a lot of these camps, it's not just the prospect filling out the coach. It's the coach filling out the prospect as well. And I think everything is on the up and up and where it needs to be. You got the sense Drayton loved working with Mickens, and Mickens clearly loved working with Drayton. So if you're a Penn State fan, I think you could breathe a whole lot easier on where Messiah Mickens is at right now, because I'm not anticipating any fireworks down the stretch here. We'll see. Recruiting is as fluid as it is, so we can be having a different conversation next week. But right now, it looks pretty good with where Penn State and Mickens stand.
I want to give a shout out as well. Charles Walker,
Yes,
assistant running backs coach for Penn State. He was the assistant running backs coach under Jaywan Sider. He remains the assistant running backs coach under Stan Drayton. First off, the guy brings a ton of juice to drill work. That's on the practice field, but that's definitely on the camp field, and we appreciate that. We've been posted up by that running back group the last couple of Sundays because 2 weeks ago, it was Kimon Spell, the 2027 top 100 prospect who's committed to Penn State, going through the work. And then this past Sunday, it was Messiah Mickens, as we mentioned. And Charles Walker got a rave review from Messiah Mickens about being a stabilizing presence, someone who is a consistent piece in that room, someone who will be a familiar face and remains a familiar face for Messiah Mickens. So I just thought we spent so much time whenever we mentioned Mickens discussing Drayton and Sider, but behind the scenes a little bit, it's very important to note what Charles Walker has managed to do with some of these running back recruits in that room in general as an assistant. Mickens, by the way, over 200 pounds, clocked a 4.48 40-yard dash, he told me during Sunday's camp. And again, he'll be back on campus Friday for some 7-on-7 work with his Harrisburg teammates. So 2 trips to Penn State in a 5-day span, and that's on top of the official visit he made just a couple weeks ago. So a frequent flyer lately in Happy Valley. Elsewhere in the offensive backfield for Penn State's 2026 class, we got our second look at Peyton Falzone in a matter of weeks. We saw him earlier this summer toward the tail end of spring, however you want to phrase this time of year, over at Elite 11 State College Camp. And we saw both him and Troy Hune in that setting. And we came away, and hopefully caught our commentary and our coverage and our highlights at Lions247.com. But it was very clear that Troy Hune is the more polished passer, someone who's far more comfortable in the pocket, handling some of that drill work that the Elite 11 staff sent his way over the course of that afternoon than Peyton Falzone is right now, who put up really impressive numbers last year as a junior, dual threat quarterback, has a really powerful arm. But the problem right now is he's spraying passes a little bit. The accuracy and kind of the ability to confidently project where those passes are going, when it goes beyond 10, 15 yards too, some of these deep balls for Peyton Falzone, it's been a little bit tricky to track for him in these camp settings. And so kind of the same deal on Sunday. Tyler, you weren't at the camp on Sunday because you were covering all the official visit madness that we had going on. but it was a lot more of the same. It was a bit scattered when it came to intermediate to deep shots for Peyton Falzone. You can see he is working on a lot of that technique. I think it's very difficult. It's one thing to go and spend a few hours with Brad Mendler in that setting, going through the training. And remember, Mendler, of course, is the same QB trainer for Drew Aller, for Ethan Grunkemeyer. There's a lot of history there at this stage. But when we look at him trying to clean up his mechanics, and he knows he needs to build into a more polished passer to find success at the next level, I think it's tough to, in live time, when you've got coaches yelling you directions, when you're in a line with 80 other quarterbacks, sometimes it can be tough to put that all into translation and see it come to fruition on a practice field in a camp setting. I hope we get another look at Peyton Falzone later this summer, but I think right now we're just going to say incredible athlete, outstanding athlete. He ran a mid 4.5 40-yard dash. This is a guy who's pushing towards 6'5" at 200 pounds. He's a lot of fun to watch move around with the football in his hands. But when it comes time to take the snap from your center, and you've got a couple seconds before an edge rusher from Ohio State is going to barrel down on you and bring you to the turf, I think those are the moments that any young quarterback is going to have to figure out who they are. But I think we've got a long learning process ahead of us with Peyton Falzone, regardless of what he goes on the field and accomplishes against high school competition this fall. And that's okay, because this is the kind of quarterback prospect that Penn State signed up for when they targeted Peyton Falzone and said, no, not as a tight end, as a quarterback.
Yeah, it feels weird to say, but Falzone's kind of a known commodity at this point, in the sense that we know he's an elite athlete and we know where he needs to improve as a quarterback, and we know strides need to occur. The one thing I'll say about Falzone in a camp setting versus what you see on film, I think on tape you see more of his ability to make plays off script, and that's what makes him such a special prospect. I think him using his legs to extend plays and just fire it off downfield, using that flick of the wrist kind of arm strength after things break down in the pocket, that's obviously something you're not going to see in a camp setting. But at the same time, what you do see in a camp setting is a need to improve within the pocket, which, let's just be honest, if you want to be a successful quarterback in the Big Ten, going up against Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, all these schools that are high-level programs, high-level defenses every single year, you're going to have to stand in the pocket. You're going to have to go through your progressions. You're going to have to make accurate throws downfield. Falzone does a good job on tape of standing in there and going through his reads, but again, the ball has to get to its intended destination. So he's just got to keep taking strides forward if he wants to be a successful quarterback at the next level. Falzone's another kid in this class who he just won't be outworked. We've seen all of the work that he has put in to become a high-level quarterback prospect and earn that offer as a quarterback from Penn State, as you mentioned, not to play tight end, but to play quarterback for James Franklin, play quarterback for Danny O'Brien. He put in a lot of work to get to that point, and he's going to continue working. Now, will he get there? Only time will tell, but there's still some strides that need to be made. And the good thing for Penn State is, again, like you said, you know what you're signing up for. That elite level athleticism, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So that's always going to be something as a building block in his foundation as a quarterback recruit.
He's got a great personality. I think he's bought in on his future at Penn State, but it is going to be a build-em-up type process at quarterback, where I think you bring Troy Huhn to campus and you kind of have a better feel for who he is as a pocket passer. I don't have a feel for who Troy Huhn is when the play breaks down and he has to create. I have a pretty good feel for who Peyton Falzone is, to your point. There is an improvisational toolkit that he has, just like we saw in the past from a guy like Bo Perbula, just like we saw in the past from a guy like Trace McSorley. And those things don't show up, like you said, when you're in a camp structure, but we're working off evaluations from a camp structure.
Exactly.
So this is what we got from Peyton Falzone. We do have video highlights up from Elite 11 camp a couple weeks ago. Again, we'll see if he's back on campus again to get more work with Danny O'Brien, Andy Kotelnicki, and the Penn State staff. That'll always be an important part of the process. But plenty to talk about him in the future as he develops. At wide receiver, man, I think this was the biggest eye-opener for me, aside from confirming that Kevin Brown's an absolute freak, was seeing a Jasir Rogers out there, out of Delaware. He's a guy that I think everybody has been pounding the table a little bit on our message board and being like, why is this guy ranked so low? What is he, the number 99 wide receiver in 24/7 sports rankings?
I've seen that number a bunch.
Yeah, I think he's an 87 or an 88 ranking, putting him in high 3-star status. He's more than that. He is absolutely better than that ranking. We've passed along the highlight film to our scouting department at 24/7 Sports. Full transparency, I don't determine rankings. Tyler doesn't determine rankings. Mark Brennan doesn't. Daniel Gallen doesn't. No one on any of these individual team sites within the 24/7 Sports network are giving out grades and determining how a guy is rated or ranked in our 24/7 sports rankings. That's an entirely separate department of the company, but we work with those guys. They ask for feedback, we give it to them. And my feedback, I think, was pretty strong. I wrote a story on Sunday just about how much the case was made for this receiver to vault up our rankings and get a little bit more of attention in the national conversation, I think. Rodgers, to me, and he reported that he's at 175 pounds now at 5'11". The eye test matched up with what he told me. He also told me he ran a 4.3 range 40-yard dash, but that's not really surprising for him, right, Tyler? Because the word on him has been 4.3 range 40-yard dash. So he's getting bigger. He's getting more physical. He remains an elite speed level. And this guy is outstanding at tracking the ball. I got to say, in a camp setting, I haven't seen a receiver lately, probably not in a camp structure here at Penn State, consistently track deep balls as well as he does. And that's something that was reflected on film. He averaged like 23 yards per catch as a junior last fall, but it showed up time and time again. You know this, Tyler. Quarterback play in a camp setting, you're not always sure what the pass is going to look like. There's like 60 quarterbacks. Some of them are 15 years old. Some of them are seniors who aren't very good. And so you're just not quite sure how much wobble is going to be on the ball, how much you're going to have to maybe backtrack and work against a defensive back. And it didn't really matter in this setting because he was on point. He had a bunch of separation off the snap. This was working against some of the defensive back commits for Penn State too. There was a couple reps where he really challenged Darryl Carey, safety commit out of DeMatha Catholic. And at one point, Carey would have been called for a flag for grabbing his jersey. And on both situations, he put himself in a spot, did Rodgers, to come down with a catch. And so I add all of this together, and we've had a lot of conversations about how it seems like Penn State's receiver room is moving in a good direction based on what they have added here in 2025. Well, you got to stack on that, right? You got to keep stacking. And there are other players in this class that we like. Davion Brown is the most highly rated receiver in their class, top 24/7 player. But I think this young man in Rodgers deserves a reevaluation. And I think if there are Nittany Lions fans out there are scratching their head and being like, are we sure we got a good wide receiver? Go to that highlight film at lions247.com. It's only about a minute and a half, but I think it's pretty convincing about where he is in his development.
This is a 4-star recruit. I mean, that's just really what it is. I think if he lived in any other state or almost any other state, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. That's just kind of the harsh reality of it because, Delaware gets the rap that Delaware gets. Leighton Von Brandt, if he's hearing this, I'm sure would have something to say about that. But, no, I mean, you're right about the speed. He's always been a 4.3 guy. I think it's even more impressive now because he's going 4.3 at 175 pounds as opposed to 4.3 at 165. There's been zero drop-off in speed, which if you're the Penn State staff, that is exactly what you want to see out of a kid in his development. Because, look, it's not going to be much longer before he's in the weight room with Chuck Losey packing on pounds, adding muscle. He's going to be a heavier kid once he kicks off his Penn State career. And they're still going to be counting on him to be a speed demon. And clearly he has been able to add muscle and get stronger and get bigger without sacrificing speed. So the fact that that's already in the back pocket is a huge developmental marker in his favor. And again, Penn State is a good one here. Davion Brown's a really, really good recruit. LeVar Keys is a really good slot receiver. Would it surprise me if Jasir Rodgers is the best wideout of the bunch when we reflect on this 5-6 years down the road? No, it really wouldn't. I think he has that in him. The speed, the athleticism, the ball skills downfield, the ability to go up and get it over bigger DBs, ability to go up high point. I mean, he has a lot of the tools you really, really want out of an outside wide receiver at the next level. This was a really good early ID by Penn State, and the staff did well to lock this one down early because who knows what it would have been had Jasir Rodgers been active on the camp circuit this spring, and his recruitment very well could have blown up if he was going through all that as an uncommitted kid. Penn State made sure it never got to that point, and I think they have a potentially special wideout on its hands as a result.
Let's finish our evaluations from camp with a few linemen here, and then we'll get to a couple defenders as well. But Roseby Lubintis and Alex Haskell were both on campus for Sunday's camp. We saw Roseby Lubintis also participating at the Big Man Challenge on Friday, and a program source told us on Friday that the 6'5" Lubintis out of Timber Creek High School in New Jersey has been committed for about a month and a half, that he checked in on Friday at 350 plus pounds. Now, that same source told something that we would agree with, that he didn't look 350 pounds. If you had said, how much does this young man weigh? I probably would have said, I don't know, 325, 330. He carries that well. Doesn't mean the staff wants him to be 350 plus pounds. But I thought over the course of the 2 days we watched him, took coaching very well. He was definitely challenged by the coaching staff, and I think part of that was his physical makeup. They want him to be in a better spot, but he was sweating through it. He got the gauntlet from James Franklin on Sunday where James says, work at every single offensive line position doing one-on-one work, and I don't want you to stop in between. Do it in front of me. And I thought he responded pretty well after a rough first rep there. He bounced back, finished strong. It was the end of Sunday camp. It was his second camp in 3 days. So I know he was pretty exhausted, but he showed some stamina in that situation. And watching him move in the 40-yard dash, I don't know what his time was, but he moves well relative to his size, very well relative to his size. And so as we get our heads around someone who's going to be more of a break him down to build him back up offensive line recruit compared to a lot of the dudes we've talked about in the past where they're 260, 270 pounds to the high school level, and then you let Chuck Losey do his thing. A little bit of a different category here, but I'm encouraged at the end of the day here with Lubintis. He's a guy that I had heard mixed reviews with on some previous stops in the camp circuit. I think he had a bit of a mixed bag on Friday, especially when you compare him side by side to someone like Kevin Brown, who's a fellow Penn State commit. But coming back on Sunday, keeping his head high through some of the lower moments and showing off an athletic range that I just can't imagine many 350-pound high schoolers possess across America. This is a long-term intrigue to me within this Nittany Lions class.
Yeah, that's really what it is. And it just comes back to the simple fact it's a simple Phil Trotwine take. I mean, he has all the athletic tools. He has the size, the length. They're going to have to get him right body type-wise. But I agree with the sentiment as well that he looked – I'll tell you, as someone who was at Under Armour, New Jersey, he looked a lot better camping at Penn State over the weekend than he did in New Jersey. I mean, it was a struggle for him in New Jersey, and it just wasn't a good performance. Let's just call it what it is. But I'm watching the video of him go through the gauntlet. I mean, the way he lost his first rep and the way you never know how a kid's going to respond after that, especially one who's, been through the rigor throughout the weekend. And
let's remind everyone, it's not just the camp where, my ego's here. I don't want to lose these reps against other good prospects. You're doing this, and like 4 yards away from you with laser focus is James Franklin, the head coach of your future football program, the offensive line coach, Phil Trotwine, and Andy Kotelnicki, who's in charge of the entire offense for the Nittany Lions. So there is a lot on these guys. So let's acknowledge, you learn something about it when they're in a pressure cooker spot like that.
Yeah, I mean, all eyes are on you. You feel that kind of heat, especially when you lose your first rep, and then he goes on to turn in 3 really solid ones. Then Alex Haskell gave him a run on the final rep, and Alex Haskell gives everyone a run. So if you're Roseby Lubintis, I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of. But look, again, it's going to be a long road probably developmentally. That doesn't mean he's not going to get there. It might take a little bit. That does not mean he is not going to get there. He's one of those guys. It kind of reminds me of Donovan Harbor, body type wise, where there's a lot of clay to work with. You got to get him in that strength and conditioning program, get him right. I think Lubintis, once he gets rolling, really starts getting ready for his senior season, you might see him start to take some more strides in the right direction. I think as he becomes more acclimated with the kind of drill work you have to do to be a high-level offensive lineman, he'll look a little bit better. That's something that's still newer to him, as we saw over the weekend, but just give him time. Exhibit patience if you're going to do anything here, because the tools are there. Lubintis has some things you can't teach. Now it's on the staff to get him where he has to be.
I learned that he has power and he has pride. And those are two important things for an offensive lineman. You can work with a lot of the other tools, and they'll be doing that for Phil Trotwine. We'll see if Lubintis is another guy we get repeat performances from on the camp circuit over the month of June. Haskell's a guy who, right off the first sight of him, this is a different dude than I've seen in previous summers. He's packed on some of that weight. It's not sloppy weight by any means, but he's clearly in that 265, 270-pound range right now, approaching his senior season at St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia. He's going to be a 4-year contributor for that defense, one of the top programs in the country. That's saying enough probably about what he's accomplished at the high school level. But looking at the next step for him, the question we had about a year ago is, where does he fit on the defensive line? I think we're starting to figure out it's probably going to be leaning toward the interior, but he got reps on the edge, and he still is someone who has enough length and an ability to really burst off the football, where I think you can probably play him here, there. I'm reminded a little bit of how the staff evaluated Amin Vanover during much of his career. Depending on the day you talk to someone on the coaching staff, they might tell you he was a defensive tackle. They might tell you he was a defensive end. He ended up playing both, ended up really settling in on the edge. But I think you're getting a piece here with Haskell where it's okay. If you bring him in and you're not quite sure, there's nothing wrong with that, because he will make an impact once he gets his opportunity. I'm not sure it happens very early in his career, but he's exactly the kind of mental makeup and physical makeup that I think if you're Deion Barnes, you trust yourself and you trust your conditioning staff that where he's at when he's 20 years old is going to be in a really good position to help your football team and to help your defensive line.
It's kind of like Yvonne Kamaju, right? Because the original projection was, oh, he's going to be an interior guy, and we all knew he had to bulk up and add weight to get to that point. But now you're seeing him stick at defensive end right off the bat, and him generating some buzz behind the scenes in doing so. Could Haskell be that kind of guy? Obviously, they're far different in terms of their physical stature. Haskell is far more physically advanced at this point of his high school career than Kamaju ever was at his prep career. But can Haskell stick a defensive end at the very least give you quality reps there in certain defensive personnel packages, certain down fronts? Yeah, sure. Because I mean, he started out as an edge rusher at St. Joe's Prep when he was a freshman, sophomore, a little bit smaller kid. He was rushing off the edge for them. That also had a lot to do with the fact they were loaded on the interior. They had guys like Maxwell Roy, who's going off to Ohio State, playing D tackle. So they wanted to get Alex Haskell on the field. They couldn't quite do it on the interior yet as he was coming to his own physically in terms of his development. Did it at defensive end. So he has that background. I think the best way to describe him is really, in the end, he's a defensive tackle with edge rusher instincts and traits. I think he's going to become the size of a D tackle, and he's going to play that position with the D end's mindset where, look, yeah, my job's to stop the run, but I've got this edge rusher bag sitting in my back pocket. I can use it to beat you on the interior, not just with my strength, but with finesse as well. I think that can be difficult for guards to deal with at the next level. And again, if he takes reps at D end, he's still the same kid. The evaluation doesn't change. The size might be different as his college career goes on, but he's still got that edge rusher skill set and mindset. So I'd say it's a really comfortable fit for all parties involved. You're putting Haskell in situations where he's comfortable doing what he's doing. And if you're the Penn State staff, you have the versatile chess piece up front to work with.
Let's cap off our rundown of this commitment evaluation. We're not going to get to every single one. I think there were 11 or 12 total commits on campus this past weekend. We got a lot more for you at lions247.com with our VIP coverage. But two more I wanted to throw your way here, Tyler. Again, you didn't get a chance to see them as I did on Sunday, but you have more context about where they both are coming from and where they may be heading when they get to Happy Valley. Matthew Lama, who was a May commitment at linebacker out of Virginia, right around 235 pounds or so. He was a later arrival to camp, so we didn't get to see him go through as much maybe as some of the other guys. But what we did see from him is after a bunch of linebacker work, he got some of that one-on-one work as an edge rusher. And I can see why. They'd want to explore that part of his game. And the other player that I got a pretty long look at is Daryl Carey. I mentioned that maybe he didn't get the best of Jashir Rogers on those reps and one-on-one work, but overall, pretty compelling prospect here who has the length and those kind of long levers. Reminds me a little bit of former DeMatha Catholic standout KJ Winston, who came here, became a starting safety. I don't know that he has the athletic profile quite of a KJ Winston, where he was at that stage of his career, of the straight line speed that KJ Winston possessed as he was a rising senior at the high school level. But what I do see from Carey is he reminds me a little bit of Anthony Poindexter as a safety. And Anthony Poindexter probably doesn't mind racking up some guys that look a little bit like him. I think he's 6'2", but you look at the wingspan and his length, it's more of a 6'3", 6'4" type safety. And that can do some damage when you're trying to shut down passing lanes, when you're trying to corral a ball carrier in the open field. And so while Carey looks like he can get a little more fluid perhaps in downfield coverage and doing some mirroring of receivers, he looks to me like a physical presence, someone who can come downhill and wrap up. And, so what do you think about Carey? What do you think about Lama? And again, full acknowledging that you didn't get to see them on Sunday, but you've been pretty tapped into these guys for a while now.
Well, Dex would probably agree with your assessment that there are a lot of similarities between the two, because that physicality, that length, those ball skills on the back end of the secondary, that's something he's always coveted as a safeties coach at each of his stops, especially at Penn State. There are a lot of similarities between the two, no doubt about it. I think that's going to play very nicely in Carey's favor at the next level, because it'll probably be a pretty easy developmental process knowing what Carey needs to get to that next level, playing for Anthony Poindexter as part of that safeties room. I didn't get to see him Sunday, but I did get to see him during the fall. And I really agree with everything that you said. I think everything that stood out when I saw him out there against Roman Catholic in September in Philly, it was it's apparent on the camp circuit. He's long. He's another kid who I feel if he had gone through the spring contact period workouts where schools, we all know DeMath is a hot spot in Maryland, schools dropping in, schools work him out. That offer list really could have grown. If he kept camping, that offer list really could have grown. Penn State they prevented it from getting to that point. They've got a really, really good safety on board. Still growing. I mean, you saw, Seneca Driver, who's a top 100 2027 tight end out of Kentucky. He was in town. He gave Carey a run for his money during one-on-one. So, it's not a finished developmental process. There's still plenty of work to be done. But hey, look, I mean, we could say that about every single commit in Penn State's class. That's just the nature of this thing. They're high school kids. They've got a ways to go. Same deal with Llama, who I thought it was interesting. They took reps coming off the edge because I remember when he first popped up on the board, he was around 6'2", 230, and there were questions of, hey, look, is this kid going to grow into an edge rusher at the next level? I think the feedback has been no, but if he does, so be it, because he has that in him. He's got a quick first step. He has the athleticism. He does a little bit of it for his high school team as well. Not often, but if they need him to, he does it. So it was I'd say it was a solid camp showing for him. He told me he was going to be a little bit late to campus. He was kind of worried about what he was going to be able to get done with that late arrival, but based on your feedback, all the video footage you guys got over on the site, it seemed like he had himself a day, and Penn State's very pleased with him. They're very pleased with Carey. Really, they like that they saw out of all the commits who camp this weekend.
And Llama at 230 plus pounds, he's solidly built, but it's not muscles stacked on muscles. So you could see him getting to 250 fairly comfortably here at Penn State over the course of a year and a half, if that's the direction they wanted to go. Again, a ton of highlight films. We have Alice Haskell, Roseby Lubintis, Jasir Rogers, Messiah Mickens, Kevin Brown. All those guys have their own highlight videos up from camps over at Lions247.com. We've got a lot of evaluation for them. We'll continue. I've got a conversation coming up from Messiah Mickens about what he's looking ahead to, what he's experienced with Stan Drayton. So a lot more coverage coming your way from these camps, and we have more camps to come. So Lions247.com is the place to be for that. Tyler, let's get into the official visit weekend feedback. We said earlier in the show, this was a really important weekend that Penn State just experienced. A ton of uncommitted talent on campus. These are guys who are just trying to figure out where their fits are. Many of them are in the middle of very busy months of June, making official visits to every corner of the country and trying to come out of this with maybe an answer on where they want to play their college football. Penn State currently at 19 total commitments. We should talk about the 19th commitment soon, Tyler, because I just realized it happened since we last recorded the show. So we'll get to that in a moment, but we're pushing towards 20. It's a class that could ultimately feature as many as 30 recruits, perhaps. So where do you want to start with the official visitors and who has your attention?
We might as well start with probably, for my money, the top overall guy on the board when it comes to who visited this past weekend, Luke Wafel, top 24/7 edge rusher out of New Jersey. He was coming off a really good official visit to Ohio State where you start to wonder, did the Buckeyes overtake Penn State? It sounded like Penn State kind of reasserted itself here as I anticipated it would leading into the visit. Really fit was a big part of the pitch from Penn State over the weekend. Wafel is very well aware of the program's culture with his brother on the roster, and that's a big comfort point, I think, for him at Penn State. But fit was the focus of this weekend. Luke Wafel's a really good athlete. At his size, he's around 6'5.5", 250, really athletic edge rusher. And Penn State wants to kind of unleash that athletic ability. And that was a big part of the pitch, and it went over well. So Ohio State made its move. I think Penn State's standing firm at the top right now. Wafel has USC next, and I don't want to discount the Trojans because they continue to pop up and up again in conversation. Who knows what's going to happen when he gets out there for that visit. But right now, I think Penn State is in a solid spot with Wafel. They're in a solid spot with a lot of the guys coming out of this weekend, but I think Wafel, they kind of had to weather that Ohio State storm, and they did well with it.
You look across the board, Tyler, at what Penn State was working with on campus this week, and I think defensive line stood out. A lot of guys representing that target board for Deion Barnes and this coaching staff. And so Carter Meadows, certainly one of those priority names, and somebody who made it back. And feel free to throw in some other defensive linemen on this conversation, but what kind of a weekend did Deion Barnes have beyond Wafel?
A busy one, I'll tell you that. He was all over the place between Meadows, Tyson Harley, who's a priority edge rusher, who's teammates with Meadows at Gonzaga down in Washington, D.C. Top 24/7 in-state edge rusher Jackson Ford out of Malvern Prep. Ashton Blatt. On the interior, you had Damari Simeon, Keyshawn Stansel, Garrett Witherington. So Deion Barnes was probably one of the busiest people in Pennsylvania this past weekend. When it comes to the edge board, I think Penn State stock up with Meadows, Harley, and Ford coming out of this visit. I'm going to have a stock report up on the site pretty soon, kind of detailing where Penn State stands with some of its recent and official visitors, and those three guys are in that article. I think Meadows is still very open going forward in his official visits. He still has Ohio State He still has Michigan. He's been to South Carolina. So Penn State being stock up does not necessarily anoint the Nittany Lions as his leader, but I think they asserted themselves nicely. I think they left a lasting impression as Meadows goes on to two really important official visits with two of Penn State's biggest Big Ten rivals. And just a quick aside, I mean, I wrote about this yesterday. There's a lot of overlap between Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State this cycle. And that's obviously always the case. But it feels like there are a lot of kids on Penn State's board who still have to see both programs. And that's a storyline I'm monitoring down the stretch during official visit season as it really reaches its end in these next 2 weekends. Jackson Ford falls into that category. That was a nice little segue there that I wanted to set up. He still has to see Ohio State. He still has to see Michigan. He's been to Wisconsin. Badgers did really, really well with him. I've written that a bunch of times, and I want to continue to reiterate that because I think Wisconsin is a legitimate destination in the end for Ford. But I think Penn State's at the top here coming out of this visit. Culture is a big deal for Jackson Ford. He's felt awfully comfortable around the Penn State staff throughout his recruitment. That was reaffirmed throughout the weekend. Again, these next two visits are going to be crucial, but Penn State is, for my money, the leader going into those visits. With Harley, I think Penn State leads there as well. I think that the Nittany Lions are going to have a really big say in the way this one goes in the end. He still has some official visits coming up. Sound like he's going to go through the remainder of that slate. But when it comes to decision time, I think Penn State is going to be at the forefront of that conversation. So if you're Deion Barnes, comes to your edge rusher board, your priority targets on that edge rusher board, you got to like what you accomplished.
We're talking about a couple of teammates here from the same kind of position group in Harley and Meadows. Any kind of buzz around those guys potentially packaging each other? And we know how those conversations go when it comes to a package deal. But has there been any smoke to that perhaps, and maybe involving Penn State?
It's not the end-all, be-all. They've discussed it because they're friends away from football as well. So teaming up at the next level, that it's come up, and it's one of those things. Be like, oh, that would be awesome if we did that, right? But it's not the end-all, be-all in either's recruitment. And really, Penn State's the only place they could do it because Ohio State and Michigan aren't in on Harley the way they're in on Meadows. So if that was going to happen, it would likely be at Penn State, barring one of those two programs or both programs jumping in late on Harley. But he doesn't have Ohio State or Michigan on his OV schedule like Meadows does. So, yeah, it's come up in conversation. If it happens, it happens. We'll see where those guys take it. They would definitely they wouldn't mind it. I'll tell you that.
A lot to work through on the defensive line from last weekend, and Deion Barnes' reward for 48 hours with all those guys on campus was to show up to Sunday's camp and coach dozens of high school kids, including Alex Haskell and the rest of that crew. Another defensive name I wanted to throw your way because he's listed as an edge rusher at Lions 24/7. In fact, he's listed as a 4-star and a top 24/7 edge rusher on 24/7 Sports. Elijah Littlejohn out of Mecklenburg and Charlotte, North Carolina. But edge rusher is not the plan for Penn State right now. He was also on campus. Can you tell us a little bit more about how he fits on the target board for 2026?
Penn State made arguably its biggest move over the weekend here with Littlejohn. There was a lot of unknowns surrounding him heading into I wasn't even sure he was going to make the visit. He said it in April, but there wasn't much buzz surrounding him up until that point with the linebacker board. He makes it to campus, and Penn State's his leader right now. Now, I think a lot of it's going to have to do with what Kosi Okpala does, the high 3-star recruit out of Texas. I almost called him a 4-star. I had to pause. It's ironic, though, because Littlejohn's kind of like the opposite of Okpala. Okpala is a kid who could grow. Penn State likes him at linebacker, as do many others, and he's the top remaining name on Dan Connor's board right now. He could easily grow into edge rusher at the next level. We'll see where Mother Nature takes him. We have him projected as an edge rusher long-term here at 24/7. Littlejohn is like a pass rusher with elite edge rush traits, but he's going to be a linebacker just because of his size. He's probably going to be too small to play edge rusher at a high power 4 level. So that's why he's slotted in as a linebacker on Penn State's board. They like him. I think, looking at it moving forward, I think a lot of it's going to have to do with what Okpala decides, because Penn State's in that one heavily, but so is Miami and so is Texas. And the fact remains, I think it's going to remain difficult to pull Okpala out of the Lone Star State with the Longhorns pushing. That could open the door for Littlejohn. I also think Rodney Colton, who's another linebacker target in the top 24/7, he's trending elsewhere. So maybe you could see a crack for Littlejohn here. He's still got some official visits coming up. NC State's in the mix. Georgia Tech is in the mix, from my understanding. And we'll see where things go with him. But Penn State made a big move with the North Carolina product over the weekend. No doubt about it.
Let's shift our attention in state now. And we've talked so much about LaSalle College High School this cycle because that's where you'll find top-ranked Pennsylvania prospect Joey O'Brien 5-star safety, a guy who could play on both sides of the ball for Penn State. They're firmly in the mix, trying to take that commitment later this month. But also on that very roster at LaSalle College High School, Grayson McHugh has warranted attention from this Penn State staff, specifically offensive line coach Phil Troutwine. You've brought him up time and time again over the recent months and saying he is a priority on the offensive line's target board. Does that remain the case as you gather it through his official visit, and what kind of an impact did his OV perhaps make for both parties?
No doubt about it. I think really he had a case to be probably, I think if you really look at it, he could have been the top overall guy on campus this weekend. That's how much Phil Troutwine likes him. And I think moving forward, the official visits are so key for Makia, and Penn State did a really, really good job. I think Penn State is going to be tough to beat in the end. I want to see what Notre Dame accomplishes with Makia coming up this weekend. That's going to be a big visit. Texas has gotten involved in this one late and has made things interesting. But I think in the end, it's going to come down to Penn State and Notre Dame. Fighting Irish have their chance with Makia this weekend. Penn State had its chance, and I do think the Nittany Lions are going to be tough to beat, as I just said. But Notre Dame has the potential to make a move. So it's an interesting race. It's one Penn State really wants to get across the line.
Doesn't our recruiting talk always end up back at receiver, Tyler? And let's go with one more here. Out of Oscar Smith High School in Chesapeake, Virginia, Travis Johnson, 6'3" wide receiver, considered one of the top 25 players at his position in our rankings at 24/7 Sports, number 173 overall. Earlier we discussed, they've got a pretty good collection of receiver commits already. They're not done yet, and Marcus Hagan's had one of their top targets in town for 48 hours. What do we make of this?
Good visit. It was a visit that needed to take place in order for Penn State to remain a top choice for Johnson, just because he learned more about his fit, learned more about how he would be involved in the offensive game plan, how he would be a potential focal point of the passing attack for Penn State, given his frame, 6'3", 190, 195, can go up and get it downfield. Would be a nice compliment to the guys Penn State currently has committed. Michigan's in strong. South Carolina's in a good spot. So this one's far from done. Johnson still has to see Michigan. He's already been to South Carolina. But I think Penn State gave him a lot to think about during the official visit. And then the Lions are going to remain right in the forefront of that conversation. A lot of it has to do with fit. The rest of it has to do with, Marcus Hagan's has so much respect among the Johnson family. That's been the case for a long time. That relationship is a big reason why Johnson's so high on the Nittany Lions.
Well, they got one of the best receivers in the region out of Virginia, and Davion Brown. Maybe they can strike again with Johnson. Tyler, you've mentioned it a couple times. It's kind of like the halfway marker of official visit season. So what do you have your eye on? I'm not necessarily talking about specific players, but as we finish out the show here, as we again say, 60% off VIP coverage, what kind of coverage are we looking at for the next few weeks at Lions247.com from a recruiting angle?
Really, we've got it all. We broke down the commitment of Amari Polidor coming out of his official visit. We were breaking down what's coming out of all these OVs in general, whether it resulted in a Penn State commitment or not. We've got you covered in depth with camp coverage. So in the next 2 weeks, it's going to be jam-packed. It's been a jam-packed month to start. The VIP content has been flowing nicely. There's much, much, much more to come. So I'd say this is really just the start of it. And if you haven't jumped on board yet, now's the time, because we're going to have all of our bases covered throughout this month. It's going to be a busy month. Commitments are coming down the pipeline. We're going to have you ready to roll everywhere. As those announcements come, as we get word of them coming down the line, we're going to have you covered. That's what we do here.
Yeah, it's no secret why we have, 1,000-word reports ready for when these commitments drop on the spot. And Tyler does great work behind the scenes, along with Brian Doan, our national recruiting analyst, who chips in a lot for us this time of year at Lions247.com. I'm glad you brought him up because you bailed me out. Before we say goodbye, Amari Polidor, pick Penn State on Friday. He's another cornerback joining this group. It was a Friday night commitment, so we'll understand if maybe everyone wasn't directly jumping at the news and the coverage. And then we had, a camp, and so it got lost in the shuffle a little bit for our conversation on the podcast, but not to be overlooked. Polidor, 6'1", length at the cornerback position, and he's from St. Francis Academy, which is a school in Baltimore that always has power conference talent, but Penn State really hasn't brought much out of there, and maybe anything that I can recall in covering the team. And so, Tyler, two-parter here. What are they getting in Polidor, and what are we, noting in the fact that they did strike at St. Francis?
Yeah, I don't think James Franklin was ever signed a St. Francis kid in his tenure as Penn State's head coach. Yeah, Andre Roy committed back in the day, but that obviously went in a different direction. And Polidor's not a true St. Francis kid. He's kind of like a one-year rental kind of deal. He was at Mount Zion Prep beforehand, but hey, look, you're still in at Baltimore's premier program and a national power at that. So having those relationships in place, building on them, it always helps. And Polidor is a really good player. I mean, he's not the highest ranked kid in the world, but Penn State staff doesn't really care. I mean, he's got the length, he's got the cover ability. I think there's a lot of faith in Terry Smith's ability to coach him up and get the most out of that upside. So I like the take. I know we've gotten some questions. Oh, why would you do this when Kari Adams is still out there for the taking? Why would you do this when Dorian Barney is still out there for the taking? I mean, this is how it goes. If you want a kid, you move on him. And Polidor very clearly wanted to get in. And it wasn't really a secret down in the DMV either. He wanted to be at Penn State. He wanted to make sure he had a spot. He secured it over the weekend. I think it's going to be a good get long term.
Tyler, good stuff there. I'm glad we got a little bit of a Polidor analysis, but there's a bunch more on him from Friday over at Lions247.com if you want to circle back and learn more about the latest addition to a Penn State class that ranks top 5 nationally. And who knows, by the time we sit down for our second podcast this week, we might have more additions to talk about. It's that time of year. Penn State trying to impress a bunch of guys. It sounds like they have. We'll be back with a second episode this week. We'll bring you whatever the latest is on Nittany Lions news. We do plan on hopefully getting a special guest on board to give us some fresh perspective on a piece of this Penn State football roster. But that's coming down the road. In the meantime, check out our coverage at Lions247.com. Day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour, 60% off until midnight tonight, June 10th. Gets you in for all our VIP access. Tyler, appreciate it. We'll be sharing the field again this Friday. In the meantime, I look forward to your coverage, man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Good stuff from Tyler, as always. This Tyler has got to step away for now, so wishing you all well. Thanks, as always, for listening or viewing the Lions 24/7 podcast.